Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. We are really excited to have you all here tonight. We're going to be talking about preparing your facilities for calving. Now, this is a super important step, and regardless of when you start calving, whether it's now or in the spring or fall or summer or whenever, it's always important to make sure that your facilities are prepped many weeks ahead of time, because we always know that we have a cow or fresh heifer that just needs to have their calf, way before we're ready for it, right? So whether you have older facilities, new facilities, renovated facilities, or maybe you've made simple improvements to what you have, there's always some sort of preparations that need to be done prior to that first calf hitting the ground. And no one wants to be out getting everything set up when that first cow surprises you a little bit early. So our goal tonight is to help you feel prepared for the calving season and give you possible ideas and things to consider for your own herd. We're not here to tell you what to do, what you need to buy. Maybe we're not going to say, oh, you need to go put up a giant new facility or buy a whole bunch of equipment. This is just sharing ideas from what some fellow cattlemen have. And we would really like to make this a discussion, and if there's something that works for you or some sort of facility that you have, just drop that in the chat box, because we're all here to learn and learn from each other. So let's get your calving season off to a great start here, and we are going to discuss both outdoor and indoor facilities. I'll be talking mainly about outdoor stuff, and Melissa will be covering the indoor things, but we're going to be talking about when we're outside, we're bed packs and how much space per animal we need, and some windbreak considerations, and as well as watering space, because stocking density is based upon kind of three different things: is water space, bunk space, and bedding space or laying down space. So Melissa, we're also going to be talking about calf shelters. I know some people use them, some people don't, and just some little things to take into consideration if you do decide to use them. And not only is it those calf shelters good now for the snow and the cold, but also when we get a little bit later into the spring, we think about maybe rain and mud. And so those can help keep those babies on the right path so they don't get sick. And then once we move to the indoor facilities, Melissa's going to be talking about if you do have indoor calving pens, just some ways to set those up and make sure everything you have is there and clean, and how easy are those to use. Do you have all the gates ready to go and everything like that? How much bedding you need, how much space you need for the cow, how much space do you need for a cow calf pair, and if you have a calf warming device, and some different ways to go about that. You can buy them, you can make them, just some tips to go about that. And then once you do have that cow and calf together in a pair, where do they need to go, the next steps, and move along the line so that they can move from indoors back to outdoors. All right. Go ahead, Melissa.
All right. So in the weeks leading up prior to calving, again, as Brenda says, it's all about preparation. And we're just here tonight to make sure that nobody hopefully gets caught off guard by any unpleasant surprises. But in the weeks prior to calving, I'm not going to touch too much on this, but it is recommended generally that some sort of a scour vaccine should be given. There are a couple different types out there. And again, I don't want to get too much into a subsequent presentation that's going to be talked about in another webinar series. I believe it's next week. But again, those scour vaccines need to be given prior to that calf hitting the ground in order for them to build up some immunity. It's got to be given to the mom. And so heifers, they're going to be needed. They need to have the initial scour vaccine, and then it's going to need to be boosted within the same year. Read the label, check how many weeks. Approximately. A lot of the vaccines, they've got a little bit of a window, so it doesn't have to be exactly, to the week. You don't have to be super accurate in case you didn't, hit that first cycle, second cycle, etc. But make sure you read the label, because there are some, the two of the most popular ones, they do differ in how many weeks prior to calving you can give them. Cows only need one if they've been, gotten their 2 shots as first calf heifers. cows only need 1 dose then in subsequent calving. So the next time she calves as a 3-year-old, she only needs to get 1 shot and so forth. It's really, really important to make sure that you are preparing your close-up pen facility. Cannot stress this enough. Want to make sure that that stays clean as possible. We don't have it's a little bit different if you're calving in weather like this versus later in the spring where you're going to have a really high pathogen load, a lot of bacteria, dealing with a lot of mud and scouring issues. But nonetheless, you still want to make sure that this time of year we're keeping our facilities clean. We want to keep them out of our, we will refer to them as kind of your close-up facilities. So meaning that they're close up to a calving barn. Also your females, they are your close-up ones, meaning that they're close to their due date. So again, try to keep them out of those facilities if at all possible, and then start moving them up gradually, before they get close to their close-up due date. Again, just because we want to keep those pens as clean as we possibly can. We want to make sure that we prepare and we set up our calving barn. So as Brenda already talked about, we want to make sure that we're not, working around the first pair that calved because, oops, we were caught off guard and we were surprised. So we want to make sure we've got our panels set up, we've got our facility set up, we've got some bedding down, we've got a good base, and then also we just want to be paying really, really close attention to our preg check records. Make sure that we're sorting off those, either those close-up heifers or those close-up cows. So also it's also a good idea to, like I said, try to keep them out of that pen as long as you can. However, they do still need some time to get adjusted and get acclimated. You don't want to bring a new heifer into a new facility and then you're expecting her to try to get into a barn because you're having issues with her and she's never been in that pen before. So they do need a little bit of time to get adjusted and kind of settle back down into their new surroundings.
With that, we're going to start out with our outdoor, and we're going to go move from outdoor to indoor. And so we're going to start with our bed pack. So our bed pack is a really, really important part, whether it's this time of the year or any time of the year. Well, maybe not so much in the, pasture time, but as we move from now until you get to the pasture. So we need to have, eventually when your calf pairs are paired up, you're going to need 500 to 800 square feet per pair, and that's just pen space. That's not on your actual bed pack. But for a mature cow, you're going to need 100 square feet on that bed pack for her to lay down and be comfortable. So that's 10 by 10. And then ideally after calving, you're going to want that space to move up to 12 by 12 or 144 square feet. So when we think about bed packs, it's really important to take into consideration and to have more than one bed pack, because everybody has that boss cow or that really shy cow or that first time heifer that doesn't know what's going on when she starts calving. And then they do dumb things like go have their calf in a snowbank because that boss cow is standing there and not letting that heifer lay down on that bed pack where she needs to be. So if we can have multiple bed packs so that everybody can have their privacy, they can go lay down where they want and not be bothered, because some cows, they don't really care, and other cows, they just need to have their space, and everybody needs to be respectful of that when it comes to those cows. So we also need to, when we're making that that pack, it's really important to use good quality bedding. We don't want it to be musty or dusty or moldy. That's not good for any of those new babies being born into that can create some respiratory issues. Snow is not a good bedding material, even though we get a lot of it sometimes. So in a blizzard, you have to get out there and bed, be prepared for those sort of weather events. And then also too, in the spring when it's raining, we got to get out there. And sometimes you got to bed every day because it's damp or it's misty or it's raining or other sorts of things out of our control. But when we're making that mound, if we're in the top of our mound, if we can make that like 3 feet tall and then, kind of go down from there so that you have drainage, and then that will help to, when we have proper drainage, it'll help reduce the pathogen load. It'll help keep udders clean. It'll help keep everything tracking to the right direction, so then you can like clean around the mound too. But it's also really important to have a really consistent bedding schedule. You know, I know some people that bed every day. I know some people that bed every other day. Whatever works best for you, as long as you are keeping your animals clean. So let's move on to windbreaks, because that is also a really important feature in this, and it also kind of goes right with those bedded packs. And so you can have natural windbreaks such as trees, shrubs, existing windbreaks such as using a building as a windbreak. You can use a temporary windbreak such as making a wall of round bales or panels, or maybe you have an old thrower rack that you don't use anymore. You can put some plywood on there and make a windbreak. But what's really important about that is that we want 1 linear foot per cow. So if you have 100 cows, you're going to want at least 1 foot per cow. And no, not everybody's going to be behind that windbreak all the time, but we need to have that option for them. Now, there's some things that you can do, and so some windbreaks are solid, like a building doesn't have airflow through it, right? But you can make a wall of round bales and space them a little bit apart so that you have some airflow through there. And so when we have that airflow through there, it's called porosity. And so if you want a porosity or wind flow of 25%, you need a 2-inch gap between, like, let's say you made one out of boards, like a 2-inch gap in your boards. Now, if you want a 33% porosity, you need a 3-inch gap. And so that airflow, it is good to have a little bit of airflow through there, because that'll help keep your pack ventilated and dry out a little bit. So if you can, it's a good idea to do that. And then sometimes if you don't do that, unless say you made a windbreak, and I'm going to talk about this later on one of the other slides, but it's kind of like a solid windbreak, and then there's a gap at the bottom. And so the person who had this, they say, well, it works really good, except there's kind of a you know, when the wind gets under there, it's kind of drafty. And so some things that you can help alleviate that is to build your bed pack up a little bit there, so you don't have quite the wind flow underneath there, if that's a problem for you. When we talk about bunk and feeder space, we're going to need 2 feet of bunk space per cow. And so, yes, again, not every cow is going to be up there at the same time, but we need to allow that for those cows, because if they don't have that, and if you have pregnant cows, that's a lot of stress on them when they're getting ready to calve. So we need to make sure that they have enough bunk space for cows. And if you're using, you know, whether that's an actual bunk, whether that's a hay feeder, whether that's a feeder wagon, we need to make sure that we have good quality feed in there, and that there's enough space for everybody, because then again, that comes in with like the boss cows and the new heifers, and they all need their space. And so that also goes for water space, and we need 1 to 2 linear inches per mature cow. So let's say that I'm thinking of those like red and yellow waters, and so you have 2 sides. And so let's say one side is 10 by 20 by 10, so that's 20 plus 10 plus 10 is 40, and then times 2 is 80. So you can have 40 to 80 cows on that one water. So if you have more cows than 80 cows, you're going to need for sure 2 waters. But it's also good to have multiple water sources, because everybody needs to drink. And sometimes in the wintertime, like let's say one of them freezes up, because we've all had that happen, and especially this week, it's always good to have multiple sources. And then let's move on to the cement considerations. And not everybody has cement, but if you do, we want to make sure that it's cleaned off. And this time of the year, and now when it's going to warm up, hopefully this weekend, it might get slippery, because it'll be nice during the day when it's melting, but then it'll freeze up at night. So we have to make sure that we put some sand out there, that we put some lime out there, in case that does get slippery. Now, also too, is around your waters, some people have like a cement pad. And so we need to make sure that that doesn't get iced up, because we all know that cows are kind of sloppy and they slap that all over. And then pretty soon you have a giant amount of ice. So you need to chip that off or make sure that it's not slippery and so they don't get hurt. And then also if you do have a pad around there, that there's not a giant space where they have to step up onto that cement, because they could slip, they could hurt their udders, they could get their udders dirty, and then dirty udders means that the calves nurse on that dirty stuff, which means probably sick calves or mastitis. So, and another final thing is that make sure that your cement is in good shape, meaning that it's not all cracked up or busted up, because that's not, you might as well not have cement if it's just going to be like that. So next slide. Okay, so this is just an aerial of a farm that I know, and I'm gonna get this little marker out that Melissa showed me. So we talked about bunk space, and so this whole line here, and this is northeast southwest directionally, actually. So this whole line is all bunk space. We got to make sure we have 2 feet of bunk space per cow. As we move down and around here, you can kind of see this whole area is one giant bed pack, and they bed that every other day. Or if the weather is really nasty and gross, they might come in and bed it again. And they have a bale shredder, this farm does, which is a huge time saver, and it helps to get the bedding out in a more even manner on that bed pack. As we move up here to the top, to the north, this is it's like an open front shed, and it's open on both sides. Obviously, they can't go out this way, but this is one bed pack under cover. And right here we have a water, that's one water source, and right here there's a gate. So you can take these cows that calve in this barn right through this gate into here. Now this pen here is so you can bring them in here, or you can, this is another gate or fence line here, so you can bring them around. And so in here, this is kind of like a triangle section. We can close these gates, we can close these gates, and there's actually a gate here that we can cut off in the middle. Now, gates are super important, and you can never have too many gates, okay? If that's the only thing you learned tonight, take it home. So what happens here is these cows calve, or if we need to get her into the barn to help her, we can bring her around and bring her right into this area here. And so in this barn, there's a series of gates that you can make into smaller pens, or there's one big area. And on this side, there's a lean-to. So when the cows calve, if they come in to calve into the barn, or they can calve out here and then bring in here. So then they'll just hang out in there until their babies are all good to go. And then they'll move on to this side of this gate right here, and on this side of the silo. And then they stay there for like a week, and then they come out onto the field where they get fed and they get checked every day. And then the second water source is right along here on this fence line. So you can just kind of see how this one farm sets it up. So they kind of are in one big area, and then they get processed through the barn and out. So that's just one way. Next slide. Okay, so back to windbreaks. So these are just some different ways to make windbreaks. They're nothing super expensive, and it's just all things that you can have on hand. I've seen a lot of them used with bales like these are. And Melissa found this really awesome picture of these hay rack looking things on the bottom. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if you had a hay rack that you actually used, and then you just flipped it up like a futon and then used it like this in the wintertime? Hey, if somebody's super handy, have at it. But these are just things that people had on hand. They don't have to be expensive, and you can be really creative with that. Now we do have to prepare for wind that comes from all directions. Like, yeah, normally it comes from the north and northwest, but what about you get those cold south or southeast winds too? So we have to make sure that we're setting them up for that as well. So that's where kind of these mobile ones come in handy. Next slide, Melissa. All right, so here is the windbreak that I was talking about, that the air was coming underneath there. And so it's kind of solid, and that's okay, that's just fine. But they noticed that the air was coming right underneath here. And so that's why they built up their bed pack along the edge so the babies wouldn't get too drafty in there. And this picture on the right is just another homemade windbreak, just some 4x8 sheets of plywood with slats cut in there for ventilation. Okay, moving on to the calf shelters. Now, not everybody uses these, and that's okay. But if you do want to use these, we want to make sure that you have 30 square feet per calf. We want to make sure that there's multiple openings, because you have that mama cow that stands at one end and doesn't want to move, so the babies can't go in and they can't go out. And then also, it's really good to have multiple openings in case you get a calf in there and have to process a calf in there, and then the mama is angry, and so you need an escape route. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, is safety. Make sure that they're really good and well bedded, and make sure that bedding is clean and dry, and that everybody has access to that. Now, you see in that upper right hand picture, some people choose to start them on creep feed or some calf starter of some sort. So this kind of entices those babies to come in when it's cold or whatnot. It kind of gets them started on a little feed, and so they get off to another good start. And then you can see that one too has some really nice lighting in there. So if we need to find a calf or check them, that helps a lot. I think that's all I have.
Sorry. Okay, it wasn't going forward. All right, thank you, Brenda. All right, we're going to keep moving onto the inside of hopefully, especially if you are calving this time of year, hopefully you have some sort of an indoor facility that you can get some calving pens set up. So just we had a little bit of discussion leading up to tonight's presentation. What is some of the terminology? So when I'm talking about calving pens, I'm just talking about some of these individual pens where we can put a mama cow and baby in to let them pair up. Or maybe we want to, it's so cold out, we want them to be calving inside. But when we talk about calving pens, that's really just kind of, normal circumstances. This is where we would put those pairs into, or, a female who's about to calve. So some things that we want to consider, and this is a picture that I borrowed from somebody. And again, Brenda and we are not in the facility business, or we're not here to sell you anything. We're not getting commission off of anything we've got pictured here tonight. We're just trying to give you some ideas and share some thoughts from other cattlemen. So some important things to keep in mind, though, is if you do have a really nice facility like this, there's a lot of upfront cost. It's a really big investment, especially if you're going to do it all at once. But look at, we can kind of see that, they got a working facility over here. So maybe during parts of the year, this is like a holding facility. What else can you use your calving barn or calving pens for throughout the year? Like Brenda said, you can never have too many pens, and over the years they tend to hopefully accumulate. But it's just it's really nice to have these facilities on hand. You're not just gonna, we're talking about calving facilities obviously tonight. I can name you like 8 different uses that you can use them for throughout the rest of the year. So again, it's kind of a big upfront cost, but there's so many things that you can multitask and use these facilities for. When we are getting, when we get to the inside of the barn and we're getting these pens ready to eventually put some females either as pairs if we let them calve outside, or if it's super cold, of course we want them to be inside. We want to make sure that we establish a good, clean, dry base. So you can see in this picture here that, they've obviously got some cement. So we want to make sure that that we have some sort of an absorbent material down on the base. We want to make sure that, of course, they're going to be losing a lot of fluid in there, whether it's amniotic fluid, or we just have a nursing female. She's drinking a lot, meaning she's urinating a lot. Barn lime is a great product to put down, relatively cheap. We can put that down. It deodorizes, it's absorbent, and it gives them some good footing if we are on cement. We can also use some people have access to a cheap source of wood shavings, or like wood pellets or something like that. That's a great base as well. Some people use that as their primary bedding, but just anything that we can put on that floor, especially if we've got cement, to make sure that number 1, we've got a deodorizer. Number 2, we've got an anti-slip surface. Number 3, we've got something to absorb all that extra moisture. And then on top of that, we want to put some type of a bedding material. I cannot stress enough how important it is to make sure that we are putting clean, dry, dust-free, and mold-free bedding down. when you're thinking about, okay, well, I bought this load of corn stalks, or maybe we had, a little bit of some corn stalks or straw, whatever, that got a little, it's got, a little dusty, but it'll be okay. The dust will settle. Just keep in mind that, okay, that when we got that newborn calf and we have that exposed navel, that's basically just a pathway into the inside of that calf until that navel gets closed up and dried up. So whatever we're putting down for our bedding, if there's any dirt, dust, mold, things like that, it's just an easy pathway to the inside of the calf, and we don't want to get them started off with a navel infection. When we're setting up our facilities, again, based on whether you have like a cement floor, or whether you have like a good clay base, or maybe you got a good sandy or gravel base, whatever type of flooring you have, you need to take into account, how am I going to clean this up? Okay, this time of year is relatively easy because in our calving barn already, like, there is no manure going anywhere. It's frozen pucks right now, so it's pretty easy to clean up. When we get to the spring, a little bit later on, and things start to warm up, and they start to make a little bit more of a mess, and that urine isn't freezing, and it's not as easy to clean up. How are we going to get it out? Are we mucking out pens every day? Are we easy? Can we get in there with a skid loader, and after a pair is done with the pen, can we easily clean it up? So just, keep that in mind. Or are we going to bed over top of it? Just how are you going to keep it relatively clean for the next animal coming in? Because again, if we have something, if we got a sick calf, or anything going on in that pen, and we don't do a good job of cleaning up, well, what's going to happen when we bring the next pair in with a newborn calf? Size is really important. The absolute minimum that you want to have your calving pens is 144 square feet. So that's like a 12 by 12 panel. You can make them bigger. But the absolute minimum that you want is 144 square feet. It's also going to depend on, what is the mature size of your cows, and what is the disposition of your cows. In our herd, we can get by with a 12 by 12 size pen. It's no big deal. In other operations, I know that would be an issue, because nobody wants to have to get into a pen with a mama cow that close up. Also, a thing that my vet shared with me when I was asking him for some of his input: the smaller pen size that you have for your calving pens, the more often you're going to have to clean them. So just keep that in mind. Lighting, cannot stress that enough. This is not the time of year to be cheap on the electric bill. You don't have to have the 300-watt bulbs all throughout the barn, but if you have pairs in there, especially first calf heifers, or if you're trying to get calves into, like, let's say, a creep area and entice them there, you got to make sure that it stays lit. When days are getting longer, but they're not that long. We want to make sure that nobody gets trampled on. If a calf is trying to get up and nurse, want to make sure that it can find mama. If you are in a pen trying to help something get nursing, or if you're in hospital pen, whatever, you got to have good lighting. And the last thing that we should be keeping in mind is ventilation. And this is, last but certainly not least, I cannot stress this enough, how important it is to have proper ventilation in your building. Whether it's, you have an older barn, or just something that maybe with some open sides and you're getting kind of some natural ventilation, or maybe you actually have some fans on your building that's helping to pull some fresh, clean air through. Ventilation is a big deal. We don't think about it probably this time of year, but we can actually do more harm than good if we're getting these buildings too closed up. Again, my vet, Dr. Brett Cruz, over here in Pipestone, he told me that he goes, I would rather see a building that is a little bit more open, a little bit colder, a little bit draftier, as opposed to one that is completely shut up and it's warmer and humid in there. We're going to have issues, or like big issues, with respiratory issues later on. So just some key take-home pieces: make sure that your calving pens are a minimum of 144 square feet per pen. Make sure you provide ample bedding, no mold, no dust. Make sure you clean out those pens between pairs, and we need to have that clean air coming into the barn. I just have some pictures here. Again, beautiful facility. But if we look really close, we can see the humidity, the condensation in here. There just isn't enough fresh air coming in. This is not what we want to see. We don't want to see steam in our calving barn. Okay, and also, another telltale sign, we've got the ice here, the ice buildup, we've got the condensation in that building. We can already tell just by looking at it that there's a lot of humidity in that building. We don't have proper airflow. So if we see like our walls are icing up, we see that our cows are getting really steamy, we can see the humidity in the air, that's a telltale sign, red flag, hey, we don't have enough fresh air coming into our building. So maternity doctoring pen. So this is another one where we're okay, what does everybody actually call these? And again, Brenda and I are not trying to sell you a brand new calving pen setup. We're not getting commission on that. Our take home piece here is that if these are great. I know a lot of people that have one of these entire calving pen setups. They said it was the best investment they ever made. But you know what? Other people can get by with something as simple as this and it works just as good. So depending on what you need, you can get by with not very much that'll really pan out in the long run. So size, some things to keep in mind is that when we talk about maternity doctoring pen, that's the pen where if something's going wrong, if we need to get something paired up, we have to help a calf nurse, etc. That's the pen that we would use. This is not the pen that we, unless this is like an overflow pen, this is the absolute last calving pen that we want to fill. We don't want to have anybody in there because, okay, first of all, we want to decrease the pathogen load. We want to keep it clean and dry as we can, because if we're pulling something, there's going to be a lot of extra fluid in there. We just want to keep it as clean as we can. And obviously, if we've got a pair in there, first thing, if we got to pull a calf or emergency C-section, etc., we don't want to have to be dealing with that extra pair that's already in our pen, because we need that pen. Size, same thing goes for this pen, absolutely no smaller than 144 square feet. The recommendation, though, from a couple of vets I talked to, in their experience, make it big enough so that you can catch her. You want to have enough space so that you can get possibly a calf puller in there. You can get maybe multiple people if you need to. You have enough room to get behind her, and if you can pull that calf by yourself, C-section, etc. But on the other hand, you don't want to make it too big that she gets in there and she's running laps around you. Really important too, depending on your setup, if you are doing a lot of the calving out, or let's say that you're home by yourself during the day doing night checks, etc., can you get by with one person operating this? Some facilities that I've seen are set up for multiple people to handle, and that's fine if you always have two people there. But in the case like my husband and I, if there's just one of us, can we get a cow in there if we need to by ourselves? Location, it does not have to be centrally located in your barn, but it's really good to make sure that it's easy to access. Is it easy to get them in from the outside facilities? If you see that she's having issues, how can you get her into the barn without added stress to her and then without too much stress to you? Really, really important, if nothing else, make sure you've got a good bedding and base in this pen, especially because like I said, this is the pen where if she has to lose, she loses a lot of blood, if she, her water break hasn't broke yet, we got a lot of fluid in there, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that you've got good, solid footing in there. Make sure you've got an absorbent material down, and then good bedding on top of that. The head gate or restraint system. You can see in this picture, this top picture here, they've got a beautiful head gate up there, but you can have something. I mean, a head gate is, I want to stress this, it's not critical, it's not essential to have a head gate. You can get by with something if you've got a way to catch them on a halter. I've had some vets that have said that they recommend that even more so than a head gate or restraint system. Really important to make sure, and I should have probably put a picture in here, this is where you do not want to have too fancy of a head gate. Okay, we want to make sure that is it something that you can potentially close again by yourself, so it's going to be self-latching, and we do not want to have a scissors type head gate. So something that's going to, think of how a scissors opens and closes. The reason for this is that in the event, you're pulling a calf, or, she gets stressed and she goes down. If she goes down, can she still breathe, or is she going to choke down the farther down she goes? Okay, and then it's really important to, to have some sort of a crowding panel or gate. And this can be, again, it doesn't have to be anything super fancy like this top picture. It can be incredibly simple. This is just a kind of a handmade jobby here. We just have a little panel that's mounted on one post. Okay, good idea my vet said that he can make it work on any side, but ideally, if you're gonna have to do a C-section, it's probably gonna come out the left side. So this would be set up perfectly here. We could get her squeezed in here. We could get her crowded up over here. She's got room. She can go down. She can still breathe, and the vet can get in and do what he needs to do. You can make these, a do-it-yourself gate. You can go to your local hardware store and buy one of these panels for $40 to $60. And then you can mount that in your barn. It doesn't have to be super fancy materials. We actually have one in our calving barn that is a panel kind of like this, and we cut it in half. It's mounted to the same post, and then if we need to, we can swing the bottom out and we can let a calf go underneath to nurse. Otherwise, they hook back together and we chain them up. And so if we're just trying to squeeze a cow in there, we can get her up next to the wall. This is the most important pen to make sure that you have adequate lighting in. Make sure that you do not want to have any shadows in here just for animal handling sake. Make sure that, if your vet needs to see something, if you need to get in there and, you're pulling a calf, make sure that you've got plenty of light and you can see what you're doing. So some indoor bed packs, bedded areas. If you are lucky enough to have any type of facilities like this where pairs can go into, same rules apply that Brenda had already talked about. Make sure you've got plenty of bedding, that it's deep enough. You still want to have a minimum of that, 10 square feet. That's per cow if they're, that they can go in there and, by themselves. If we have a pair, we probably want to look at that 144 square feet. So we got to, of course, account for the calf. We could have a creep area, if we want to really entice those calves to stay in there and kind of bait them in there almost, we could set up a creep area in one of these bedded pack areas inside a barn. Again, lighting is important. They're not going to want to go in there if it's dark and shadowy. So again, entice them in there, kind of bribe them to go in there. We don't want to have too many shadows. And again, ventilation is key. I cannot stress this enough. Better to have an open air kind of a little bit draftier building as opposed to one that is closed up and shut up tight. Just really quick, some calf warming devices. If you are calving this time of year, I don't want to preach to you guys, but it's really important that you should probably have something like this. You can purchase one of these. Again, kind of an expensive upfront cost, about $600 to $700, or there are certainly plans out there online that you could go ahead and build one yourself. This one right here. This is a homemade one right here. This is another homemade one. There's, like I said, there's lots of ideas out there and people are willing to share this. The vent and incoming air is critical. So we want to make sure that these are calf warming devices, that we're actually warming and drying that calf and not turning it into a sauna. We have to have some place for that warm, steamy air to get out. So a lot of these, they warm from the bottom, and the way that they work is obviously heat rises. So we need to have some sort of a vent where that warm, steamy air can go out, and we need to have an inlet, of course, of warm, clean air. Okay, so that one's vented. This one right here, of course, is vented. This one, or the one back there, I did not see if that one was actually vented or not. So just make sure that, again, if you want to properly dry them, we got to have good air coming in. So just to wrap up, some facilities do's and don'ts. Make sure that you provide adequate space. We've got to make sure that there's plenty of bedding available and that everybody has a space to lay down. Don't expect them to take turns. Provide ample, clean, dry bedding, and like Brenda said, bed often. Make sure that your indoor facilities are properly ventilated. Cannot stress that enough. It's a great idea, especially this time of year. Try to provide some sort of a sheltered area for calves, especially when we start getting more rain and things get muddier. Start training them now so that they know what it is when they get older. Keep your cement areas clean, and don't forget about the water. Okay, especially like Brenda said, check it. Make sure that you maybe have multiple options. Those pregnant and lactating cows, they drink a lot. Make sure that you are checking the water. Some don'ts, make sure that you're don't provide too little bed pack. Make sure you got space. Don't use dusty and or moldy bedding. Don't overcrowd your animals. Do not make sure that don't make your calving facilities airtight. And as Brenda already said, snow is not a type of bedding. So make sure that you provide something, that you're going to get ice, you're going to get wet hips. We don't want animals to get stressed, because that's going to lead into whole other issues with scouring. So with that is all that Brenda and I have. So we'll turn it back over to Dana and Tara.
So at this point, we would welcome any questions for our speakers, Brenda or Melissa. You can either send a message to me or Tara, or unmute yourself and join the conversation while I give people time to think about their questions. Either Melissa or Brenda, what do you consider the best type of bedding for a bedded pack? Are there options? Is there one specifically?
Do you want me to go, Brenda?
We were talking about this, and we both prefer corn stalks because one, they're kind of cheap and easily accessible for what we grew up in and use, but also corn stalks kind of have the tendency to stay fluffy, whereas straw sometimes tends to pack down and maybe doesn't absorb the moisture quite as bit all the time. But really it depends on what you have at your farm and if you have a lot of corn stalks, use a lot of corn stalks. If you made a lot of wheat straw, use wheat straw. If you have bean stubble, or you put down a base of shavings or wood chips and then straw over top, do that. Whatever works best for you and what you have readily accessible is what you need to use. Just make sure you have make sure it's always clean and dry, and that's going to be your biggest thing, whatever you use as bedding. And then also, like Melissa said too, make sure it's not moldy or really dusty, because that'll cause problems later on for both the cow and the calf.
Yep, I have nothing to add to other than, like Brenda, you said, Brenda, just depending on where you're at. We are down here in Southwest. We are not in small grains country, so we have lots of corn stalks. But I noticed in other parts of the world that straw is cheap and very accessible, and so that's what they use a lot of it. But like I said, as long as you have a lot of it and keep that bedding deep enough to keep everybody warm, then you'll be good.
Perfect. We have another question in the chat. How important is it to calve in individualized calving pens, or can one calve them in groups?
I would say it depends a lot on your cows. Depends on the type of facilities, and if you have individual pens, I go back and forth on this with a lot of different producers, and they don't need to. They calve in groups and they're fine. They only use the individual calving pens on an as needed basis. In our herd, we're calving, we started now. And so it's really important for us to make sure that calf gets off to a good start. And especially with young heifers, there's just no confusion. If she's got a couple days with just that baby and that's all that she's focusing on, and nobody's coming in to, steal her calf or mother up on it or anything like that, we like to use the individual pens, but it works for us. We've got a pretty decent facility. If you don't have something like that, then you can certainly get by without it. It's like I said, whatever works for your operation, whatever works, based on the temperament and how easy your cows are to work with, I think is going to depict, do you need to put them in an individual pen, or can you leave them in a group?
Hey, Stacy, if you're out there, can you comment on that from what you guys do?
Yeah, sorry, I was taking care of the rugrats. Yeah, I guess we try to avoid the calving pens in our situation. Not that we don't use them, but I like to let the cow calve outside of the barn first, and then I bring that cow calf pair into the calving pen, let them mother up, and then I get them out of there. My cows are not as nice as Melissa's, and they will tear apart my barn. So we like to let them, if we can get by without it, we prefer not to have them in the pens. But if they do go in the pens, it's usually after they calve, just to mother up for a little bit, and then out they go.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yep.
Could you ladies touch on how recommendations will change later on in the calving season, so as we move into late March, April?
Sure. I can start, I guess. Really, the recommendations essentially are going to stay very much the same, except that, and rather than dealing with the snow and everything being frozen, now we have a new element, and we're dealing with mud, and keeping everything clean. So like Brenda touched on, making sure that your cement, if you are lucky enough to have some aprons, or maybe you got some cement feeding floors, etc., keeping those as clean as possible, scraping those off so that you don't get a muddy, you don't get the slurry or the slop buildup, because whatever's on that hoof is going to get tracked back onto your bed pack or into your calf shelter, or wherever, and then that's going to get picked up on the cow udder. That's going to go right directly into your calf when they nurse. So really the recommendations stay the same, just like Brenda said, making sure that you're bedding when the bedding gets wet or it gets dirty. So after instead of snowing, now we're talking about when it's raining. So we just got to make sure that we got to keep that bedding deep enough and that we keep it clean enough. If you have anything to add, Brenda?
I was just thinking, if you're calving out on pasture once you get closer to the summertime, is to make sure that you have a way to catch that animal or get her back to the barn if you need to help her in any way. It's great to calve on pasture, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So like Melissa said, she's not doing laps around you, and that could injure both the cow and the calf. It's a lot of safety things we always got to keep in the back of our mind. But yeah, mud is always going to be your biggest thing. So more bedding. I do want to mention something too, and Troy brought this up to me. And if you do calve on pasture, there's something called the Sandhills calving system. And so if you have enough acreage and paddocks, it's kind of like you start your animals in one paddock, and then the first one's calve, and then you move the whole group that hasn't calved to the next paddock, and then like every week you move them, so you're reducing the pathogen load on that pasture for those new cows and calves. So if you have questions on that, I would talk to Troy or just Google it, and it's pretty interesting concept if you have the space to do so.
Yes, wonderful. The Dr. Tony Dank, who will be with us February 25th. Yeah, I saw him do a presentation about the Sandhills management system, and he has a nice little graphic with little moving cows going around in the little paddock. So hopefully we can get him that. He'll probably actually talk about in the management of calf scours on Thursday, February 25th. So we can ask him questions about that too. I'm seeing a ton of great discussion in the chat with Dr. Joe and Troy giving us great comments. Looks like Tyler picked some stuff up at Cow Calf Days, so he's back with us again. So they're not really questions, but if you guys have a chance, you can look at the chat. There's a lot of great discussion going on, a lot of personal experience. So that's great to see what works for everyone.
We're always interested and excited to hear what works for people, because what works for you might not work for your neighbor, but you can still pick up some little tidbits, so you'd be like, oh, maybe I can adapt that somehow to my farm. So
always good to borrow ideas and share resources.
And if anybody ever has a question on anything, you're more than welcome to contact any of us on the beef team, and we're happy to help you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd also like to, in a conversation that Troy and I had earlier today, this is, kind of what we're here for is your, is your extension educators. Is some of the pictures that I showed tonight was actually a herd that Troy works with. So that's part of our job. We would love to help you if there's, that you're having an issue with something. We would sure be happy to come out and troubleshoot with you, or maybe we could offer some suggestions or tips on how you could better improve or make some changes, if that's helpful.